Harold and Madison were famous throughout New York as one of the wealthiest couples in the city. They lived in a grand mansion so large that passers-by often stopped to admire the tall gates and the gleaming windows. Their wealth was legendary, but behind the marble walls of their estate, things were far from perfect. Harold and Madison had been married for 10 long years, but love was not the reason they had come together. Their marriage had been arranged by two wealthy families to strengthen business ties, and from the beginning, they had viewed their relationship more as a contract than as love. Both were proud, stubborn, and unwilling to compromise. Each believed they were superior to the other, and neither was willing to give in. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect couple. But inside their home, they barely spoke to each other. And when they did, it was usually only to argue. The true source of their conflict began when Harold's family started pressuring him to have an heir. They wanted a child to continue the family line, someone to inherit the vast fortune and empire they had built. Harold himself also began to feel the pressure. He had everything: money, power, and a beautiful wife, but without a child, his family's legacy still felt incomplete. One night, sitting in the cold dining room, Harold mustered up the courage to bring up the subject of having children. She had avoided the topic for years, and now, at nearly 38, it was becoming more urgent. Harold sat across from Madison in the living room, the dim light casting an eerie glow on the tense atmosphere between them. He had waited for this moment for years, but now that the time had come, everything felt like it was falling apart. Madison, Harold began, his voice deep and heavy. I've waited 10 years for this. My family has been asking about children for a long time. You can't keep using the excuse that it's not the right time. I think it's time we talk about this. Madison set down her magazine, her face emotionless. She looked at him coldly, then gave a dismissive laugh, as if she just heard a ridiculous story. A child? You expect me to give everything up and have a child just because your family wants it? Madison replied, her tone sharp as a blade. Do you think I would sacrifice this body just to satisfy someone else's wishes? No, Harold. I don't need to do anything to please you or anyone else. Harold felt a surge of anger rising in his chest, but he held it back. So you don't want a child because you're worried about losing your figure? He asked, his voice full of disappointment. I see, Madison. You only think about yourself, with no sense of responsibility or any love for this family, isn't that right? Madison didn't respond immediately. She remained silent, then looked him straight in the eye, as if waiting for him to understand something. It's not that I don't love you, Harold, but I don't need to sacrifice myself for a marriage that didn't have real love to begin with. Don't expect me to change just for a child. They stood there in silence, neither of them speaking another word. Love seemed to be something left far behind, replaced by a gap neither could bridge. Harold walked out to the garden, the cool evening air biting at his skin, but all he felt was an emptiness inside. Despite having everything a man could desire: power, wealth, status, and a luxurious home, he felt something crucial was missing. He had lived over 40 years, but now, looking back, he realized those accomplishments couldn't fill the void in his heart. This marriage to Madison, though it had lasted a decade, had never been about true love. Both of them were worn out from endless arguments. Madison would never agree to have a child, and Harold felt like he was living inside a cold shell, lacking any real connection. He looked into the darkness ahead, thinking about family, about children who would call him father, about a real home where there was not just the chill of money but also love and genuine care for each other. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy. Harold and Madison didn't exchange a single word, each lost in their thoughts. The arguments had yet to subside, and the distance between them became more pronounced. Madison felt exhausted, not only because of Harold's coldness but also due to the emptiness in her own life. She decided to hire a new maid, not because she needed help with housework, but because she needed a mediator. Madison didn't want to face Harold directly, nor did she want any conversations that might force her to confront issues she didn't wish to address. I've hired a new maid, Madison said indifferently as Harold walked into the living room. She sat there, flipping through a magazine without glancing at him. Harold looked at her, not entirely surprised. He was used to Madison's cold demeanor, yet his heart couldn't help but wonder why she continued to keep such a distance. Is that so? So she'll be doing all the things you don't want to do, right? Madison didn't reply. She simply turned her face away and continued flipping through the magazine as if nothing had happened. The new maid was a young woman named Ariana, just 22 years old but already carrying a sad story. She had pale skin and large round eyes that radiated kindness and diligence. Despite her youth, Ariana had already faced many hardships in life. Her father passed away when she was still a child, leaving the family in a state of difficulty. Her mother was now suffering from a severe illness, requiring a great deal of money for treatment. All the burdens had fallen on her small shoulders. Ariana knew that to save her mother, she needed a job with a salary sufficient to cover the costly medical bills. When she heard about the maid position at Harold and Madison's mansion, she applied immediately. The high salary made her see this as the only opportunity to help her mother. With her quick, efficient manner and her dedication to her work, Ariana quickly became an indispensable part of the household. She managed the housework, took care of meals, and always tried to keep the atmosphere in the house peaceful. Ariana noticed the cracks in their marriage. Every time she prepared a meal, she could sense the cold distance between them, their detached glances, their brief conversations, as if they were living in two separate worlds. But she had no other choice. She needed this job to save her mother. She took on the responsibilities of cooking and cleaning for Harold and Madison, inadvertently becoming a bridge between them. Due to the tension in their relationship, Madison avoided direct communication with Harold, relying on Ariana to pass along every message. When Madison needed something, she would call Ariana over and instruct her curtly, "Make sure dinner is ready on time," or "Clean the living room thoroughly." She never mentioned anything personal, and Ariana quietly followed her instructions. Harold similarly would ask Ariana to relay messages when he needed something. "Check my schedule," or "Prepare the documents for tomorrow's meeting." These brief statements were the extent of their interactions, a relationship bound only by the framework of work, distant and impersonal. At first, Harold didn't pay much attention to Ariana, but over time he began to notice her diligence. The meals were always delicious, the rooms tidy and well kept. Ariana also possessed pure beauty with smooth skin and a slender figure. Gradually, her grace and charm captivated him, and Harold found himself inexplicably drawn to the young woman. Though young and inexperienced, Ariana couldn't help but notice Harold's success, power, and charisma. He was a wealthy man with significant influence, qualities Ariana, a girl from the countryside, had never encountered. Harold's allure stirred feelings in her that she hadn't anticipated. However, she was fully aware of her position and knew it was impossible. Thus, she kept her feelings hidden, afraid to express them. Over time, Harold and Ariana developed genuine feelings for each other. One day, in an unanticipated moment, Harold suddenly pressed Ariana against the wall, his gaze intense with emotion, and softly yet firmly said, "You know, Ariana, every time I look at you, I can't hide the feelings inside me. I love you more than I even love myself. I can't live without you." Ariana stood still, her heart pounding, feeling as if everything around her had stopped. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with deep affection. "Harold, I love you too. I don't know how to express all these feelings, but I feel like I live only for you, for moments like this." Harold gazed into Ariana's eyes, smiling softly as he repeated, "You are everything to me, Ariana. I don't need anything more, just to have you by my side." Ariana felt as though the entire world had shrunk to this moment. She needed nothing else, for the love between them had become everything. That night they chose to be together willingly, as Madison was away. One day, when Harold returned home after a long day at work, Ariana met him at the door with a bright smile, though this time her eyes held something different. She seemed anxious yet filled with happiness. "Ariana, what's going on?" Harold asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Harold, I have some good news," Ariana said, clasping his hands tightly, her eyes alight with surprise and joy. Harold felt his heart race. "What news?" Ariana smiled, unable to contain her happiness. I'm pregnant, Harold. We're going to have a child." Harold stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe his ears. He had dreamed of becoming a father for so many years, but he never expected it to come so suddenly. A wave of happiness surged within him, and he hugged Ariana tightly. You brought the greatest joy into my life," Harold whispered in her ear. "Thank you, Ariana. As for your mother, I'll help her. She'll get better soon." Ariana smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so happy too, Harold. I believe we will build a wonderful family together." In the days that followed, although the joy of the child filled both their hearts with happiness, worry began to weigh on Ariana. She couldn't stop thinking about Madison and how she would react if she found out about the affair between her and Harold. Ariana often sat quietly, her hands tightly clasped, eyes gazing into the distance where the dim light of the evening sun filtered into the room. She knew that if Madison discovered the truth, everything would collapse. She would not only ruin Harold's relationship with his wife, but she could also lose the only job she had, a job she loved and desperately needed to support herself. Harold, if Madison finds out. Ariana spoke softly, her voice trembling as if she were searching for an escape. Harold looked at her, his eyes filled with concern, but he couldn't undo the truth. You're worrying too much. Ariana will figure something out. I'll protect you. But Ariana couldn't stop thinking about Madison's fury, about her screaming and kicking her out of the house. Madison was a woman of power. She could do anything to make Ariana's life miserable. Ariana knew she was at a disadvantage in this battle. I can't keep living in fear like this, Harold. If she finds out, I'll lose everything. My family, my job, I'll have nothing but regret. She spoke, her voice trembling with anxiety, her eyes full of helplessness. Harold looked at her, knowing that there was no way to resolve everything with just comforting words. I will figure something out, Ariana. Don't worry too much, we will face this together. After learning that Ariana was pregnant, Harold decided to divorce Madison, a bold and difficult decision. However, Madison would not accept this. The anger and hurt from her husband's infidelity made her so furious that it seemed like she might lose her mind. In the end, the three of them decided to sit down and talk things through clearly. Madison sat across from Harold and Ariana, her eyes sparkling with uncontrollable rage. Every word she spoke felt like a sharp knife cutting into their hearts, full of bitterness and resentment. So you want to divorce me just because of this maid? Madison snarled, each word like fire. Her gaze seemed ready to burn both of them alive. And the child she's carrying. Do you even realize it's the result of your betrayal? You're playing father to her, leaving me behind all these years. All I've done for you, for this family, and now you treat me like this. Harold looked at Madison, his face filled with anguish, his voice lowering. Madison, you know I didn't want this. But I can't continue living in a marriage without love. I love her, and you have to accept that. I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Ariana stood silently beside him, feeling guilt and fear rise within her. She never expected things to escalate like this. Madison turned to her, her face flushed with hatred. Don't think you're loved. You're just a puppet. You can be proud of that baby, but to me you will always be a replacement, the third person in my life. Madison lunged forward, shoving Ariana back, her voice rising in a sharp, piercing scream. Do you even deserve him? Don't get your hopes up. Get out of my house. Ariana stood up, trying to steady herself, her heart in turmoil, not knowing how to respond. Harold stepped forward, intending to hold Madison back, but she swatted his hand away, her face red with fury. You can pretend like everything is fine, but I won't let her harm me in this family. Do you think you can easily overthrow me? Madison yelled, her eyes burning with the intent to hurt the woman standing before her. 3 days after the tense confrontation, Madison decided to carry out her plan for revenge. She secretly rented a car and made plans to stage an accident. One morning, as Ariana was walking along the sidewalk, Madison drove at high speed, intending to create a threat. As she got closer, she suddenly accelerated and charged towards Ariana. Unable to react in time, Ariana was struck by the car, falling hard to the ground with her knees and hands bleeding. At that moment, Madison paused for a second, looking through the rearview mirror and seeing Ariana lying motionless on the sidewalk. She felt a sense of satisfaction, but also worried about the consequences, before hastily driving off without stopping to help. With this act, Madison wanted to make Ariana suffer, not only physically but also mentally, ensuring that she couldn't continue her peaceful life with the baby in her womb. Madison believed this revenge would make Ariana pay the price. The accident landed Ariana in the hospital, but fortunately, both she and the twins were fine. However, she still sustained minor injuries and needed time to recover. Harold was furious when he learned that Madison was the one responsible. He decided not to let his wife's crazy actions go unpunished and began gathering evidence to accuse her. He secretly investigated, searching for witnesses and any necessary proof to bring Madison to justice and protect Ariana and their child. Just 1 week later, Harold had gathered enough evidence to charge Madison. The police arrested Madison for her actions. Standing in court, Madison's once proud demeanor was gone, replaced by regret and despair. Her eyes were deep and dark, reflecting sleepless nights and the weight of guilt pressing down on her slender shoulders. When she began to speak, her voice trembled not only from fear but also from the profound sadness consuming her soul. "I know what I did was wrong," Madison admitted, glancing down at her clenched hands as if they could shield her from the inevitable verdict. "But, Your Honor, I'm not just a criminal. I'm a woman who was betrayed, shattered, and left with unbearable pain. I loved my husband, I gave him all my trust. Yet he betrayed me and turned his back on the vows we made." Her voice choked and a tear rolled down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, as though unwilling to show any weakness. When he asked for a divorce, I felt like the whole world was crashing down. I lost my support, lost myself. The man I had built my life with, he was ready to throw me away so easily. I tried to stay calm, tried to accept it, but the pain kept gnawing at me. I felt worthless, rejected, abandoned, she continued, her voice trailing off. "Now I understand. I let anger consume me. I couldn't control it. And in that dark moment, I acted out of desperation, wanting to regain the control I had lost." Madison looked up, her eyes pleading toward the judge. "I am not asking for forgiveness, but I hope the court understands. I was driven by the pain of betrayal. I know I have to face the consequences of my wrongdoings, but I am also a victim of a broken heart, of shattered trust. I lost my family, I lost myself, I lost the reason to keep living." When she finished speaking, the courtroom fell silent, a heavy stillness enveloping the room. Her face was a portrait of sorrow and regret, but in her eyes, there was still a glimmer of resentment, as if she still believed her pain justified her actions. At that moment, Madison was a woman torn between accepting guilt and clinging to the sense of injustice that had pushed her down this dark path. In the end, she agreed to the divorce and the division of assets and accepted responsibility before the law. Now, Harold and Ariana could finally breathe a sigh of relief and begin a new life, though many challenges still lay ahead. A month later, Ariana gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. She and her mother and 2 children lived happily together, with Harold always by their side to care for and love them. Although Harold had divorced Madison and was now short on assets, he was not too worried. He felt happy because he finally had a real family. Determined not to give up, Harold started over. After only 5 years, Harold had rebuilt his career, giving his wife and children a full and loving life. It was love and hope that motivated him to continue to strive, because he understood that happiness does not lie in wealth, but in precious moments with loved ones.